are ready.
Okay. All right. Hello, everybody. Just want to make sure you can see my slides.
Yes.
You can see it. Okay. Okay. Um, so, yeah, today I'm going to give you a is it okay?
Yes.
Okay. So today I'm going to give you a presentation on artisanal mining. And this is, for me, it's almost like a hobby. To work with artisanal mining. I'm a professor of mineral process engineering. My first degree was in mining and mineral processing, so I understand mining and mineral processing. Um, and when I, um, you know, got my PhD and I worked for 8 years, I worked for a company, a consulting company, where I was involved with designing processes for industrial companies, large scale companies. And over an 8 year period, I worked on about 300 different mineral deposits, and about half of them were related to gold ore processing. And then when I joined UBC, one of my colleagues, a guy named Marcelo Vega, who was from Brazil, he introduced me to artisanal mining. And I realized that perhaps my understanding of gold metallurgy could be helpful to him, and he invited me to participate in several programs focused on artisanal mining in different parts of the world. And so for me, it was interesting because I could see, okay, what these artisanal miners are doing. I could really understand what they were trying to do. I could also understand what they were doing well and what they were doing poorly. But through that, I also learned about the effects of artisanal mining on the environment and health, and uh, and that's what I'm going to summarize today. So the materials that I'm going to show you are not necessarily relevant to Mongolia. Some of them are, but they, it's a snapshot of what's happening or been happening over the last 20 years around the world with artisanal gold mining. Okay, so generally, artisanal mining is a poverty-driven activity. Um, people who often live in the countryside and are trying to find a way to make a living are resorting to artisanal mining because they realize that they can perhaps earn even more than they can through other means in order to sustain themselves and to feed their families. So mostly it's in rural areas and rural communities where those people in those communities have low political clout. They're ignored by politicians. They're strongly dependent on the natural resources. And in most parts of the world, this is occurring. Um, Now, some of this information is a little bit outdated, but probably it's not that uh, irrelevant. But in 2010, 48% of the world lived with less than two US dollars per day. Around 1.4 billion people lived with less than $1.25 US dollars per day. So again, poverty is a big driver for artisanal mining. Um, so when the people in those rural communities um, consider what are their alternative livelihoods, depending on where you are, it could be agriculture, farming, livestock, but mining is one of the options. In some of those areas, there may be large-scale mines, but to a large extent, many of the people in these communities have found mineral deposits where they can mine metals like gold. And they may be small deposits, so they're of no interest to the mining, but they still create a livelihood for the people in those communities. Um, about 30 million artisanal miners around the world extract minerals, and to a large extent, that's gold, and to a large extent, that's conducted in developing countries. So, over the past couple of decades, gold prices have increased. And because gold mines have increased, it resulted in a significant increase in the number of artisanal miners. But these artisanal miners, they generate quite a lot of gold, a significant amount of gold through their activities. 10 to 15 million artisanal miners produce around 350 tons of gold per year in more than 70 countries. So there's estimated to be between 50 and 100 million people directly and indirectly involved with this type of activity. So the gold mining, the gold price has increased, and that really drives these activities of artisanal miners. It's estimated that of the artisanal miners, at least, or in the order of about 9 million women are involved with this activity. So that's about 50% of all of the artisanal miners are women. And so they often have some of the less trained jobs. They do very basic activities to try to pick rocks that might contain gold. They have to recognize what they are. They accumulate them, and then they try to recover them, to recover the gold from selected materials. In addition, children are significantly impacted. This statistic is outdated, but back in 2004, it was estimated that 2 million children are working in artisanal mining. And so this is happening in just about every developing country around the world. So they also do basic tasks, just trying to recover a small amount of gold to support their families. In addition, accidents are a big problem in artisanal mining. It's estimated that at least 10,000 artisanal miners are killed every year. And this could be through the mining activities where they burrow into hillsides. They have no understanding of the stability of the material that they're digging into. Material collapses on them, but it's also due to the exposure to chemicals like mercury. So here's just an example of one incident that occurred where in Ecuador, where 7 people died and 17 others were injured in a landslide that was caused by artisanal mining. So these types of things are occurred in the past, and they still occur today. But then there's a number of other environmental and social impacts caused by artisanal mining. When the miners excavate the material, they process it. The sediments that are created go into streams and rivers and waterways, and the suspended solids that are generated contaminate the water. They of course change the landscape where they are mining, making it unsafe. There are a number of social issues like prostitution, drugs, HIV in different parts of the world that have been caused or created through the artisanal mining communities. There's often conflicts between artisanal miners and the mining companies that might be trying to work in those areas. Cultures are affected, and then there's significant mercury pollution, and in some cases, some of these parts of the world the artisanal miners are using both cyanide and mercury, which causes even a more significant issue. So here's a picture of a typical type of setup for an artisanal miner. In this case, they are using what's called a sluice. This is one of the oldest ways of recovering gold. And the miners dig up the sands and they put it across a trough, and the material flows across the trough and there's a carpet at the bottom of this trough where the gold gets trapped. But in the meantime, you can see that the water that flows off of this technology called a sluice flows into a river, and it contaminates the river. At the end of the day, the miners will stop treating material. They'll clean the carpet in this sluice, and they'll often use mercury in order to amalgamate the gold in order to recover the gold. So these sediments that they deposit into the river can be contaminated with mercury and are just transported down the river. And so now the mercury exposure isn't limited to the area where we're mining, but it's transported along riverways and hundreds of kilometers away from where the mining activity occurs. And in some regions of the world where there are many artisanal mines along a river, there's an accumulation of the sediments and often mercury contaminated sediments. So this results in the mobility of mercury. In the northern part of Brazil, the Amazon region, these sediments are transported hundreds of kilometers, where this mercury is transported. And the main issue is that mercury, which is originally in a metallic form, then starts to react with the organic material that is in the river, in the plant life within the river, and it converts the mercury into a more toxic form called methyl mercury. So the mercury is methylated, and then that mercury starts to build up in the food chain, such that the fish get contaminated, and then eventually the people who eat the fish get contaminated. So there are high levels of mercury in the fish. So where there is artisanal mining, you see abandoned sites. This is an example. I think this is where I might have visited one time. This is in, perhaps it's in Indonesia, in a place called Central Kalimantan, where the miners use dredges to excavate the material and process it over sluices. And so you have these large areas that are scarred from the mining activity, and they're unsafe to try to access. So in Central Kalimantan, when I visited this area, I think this particular area was an area that was probably as large as 30 or 40 kilometers long by 10 or 15 kilometers wide. So a very large river basin. So over the years, mercury consumption has been increasing because there's been an increasing number of artisanal miners around the world. And this just shows a couple of numbers. And when UNEP, the United Nations Environmental Program, did a study, they tried to look at the sources of mercury emissions as a consequence of the human population, so anthropogenic emissions. And what they found was that when you look at all of the mercury emissions, the largest contributor to mercury emissions was artisanal mining activities. So total emissions were 1,960 tons per year, but 37% of that were from artisanal miners. There are other sources of mercury emissions, but it was recognized at that time that artisanal mining is the largest source of mercury. So as a consequence, there has been efforts to try to ban the use of mercury. The European Union signed an agreement with the United Nations to stop mercury exports. Interestingly, you have to say, well, where does all the mercury come from? And until the EU started to look at banning mercury, It was mostly Western developed countries that were the source of this mercury that was going to all the developing countries. And there were examples given, such as mercury being sold from Holland to Brazil, um, and they just said it was for dental work, but actually a lot of it was probably going to artisanal miners. And several countries have not yet, this may have changed, but at that time had not signed on to that agreement yet. So there's pressure on governments in order to ban the export of mercury. Several mining companies, in large-scale gold mining companies, they have gold, but as a secondary product, they may have some natural occurring mercury in their deposits. And in order to get rid of it, they would just try to sell it. I think that practice has been mostly stopped, but because I think the mining companies realize there's really no significant value of selling that mercury, and there's a significant environmental and health impact of trying to sell that because it's where it ends up. So this is a little bit outdated, but it shows the 10 largest mercury consumers in gold mining. And this may be 10 years out of date, so I don't know what this list looks like today, but you can see that Mongolia was listed as one of those countries. Okay. As a matter of fact, the first artisanal and small-scale gold mining conference that I attended was in Ulaanbaatar, and it was probably around 2006, with a recognition that there was significant artisanal mining in Mongolia and significant use of mercury. Now, many of these countries will deny that they have artisanal mining, and they will deny that their artisanal miners use mercury. But if you go a little bit underground, you'll find pretty quickly that there's still significant use of mercury by artisanal miners, even if it is illegal. One of my PhD students, he was working with Marcelo Vega, the person who's a global expert on artisanal mining, and I was a co-supervisor. He went to China, as an example, and he went into rural communities. He could speak Mandarin, and so he was able to meet small companies that were operating their artisanal mines and using mercury, although the government denies that they actually use it. So there's a significant underground activity associated with the use of mercury in artisanal mining. So in the case of Mongolia, mining is a very important industry. This is a slide from one of Belorma's presentations that I borrowed. And so we understand that mining is important. And in many parts of the world, people believe that, that the local miners, they should have the rights to mine the land because they have ownership of the land. So they actually often perceive artisanal mining as a better practice than large-scale mining. However, they have no environmental controls. They have no health and safety controls, and that creates a real issue. So in Mongolia, since 1993, again from Belorma, there has been reported to be between 38,000 and 60,000 artisanal small-scale miners. Only a small portion of those miners are formalized. They don't only mine gold, but they mine coal and fluorspar as well. But this picture just shows some of the activities of artisanal mining in Mongolia. So, you have to say then, well, if it's illegal, and if we know that it's causing social and environmental issues, it must be hard to buy mercury. Surprisingly, in a lot of countries, it's quite easy to purchase. This is a picture of a sign at a store in Zimbabwe, and so anyone can buy it. Um, the controls are just not in place. I don't know how the artisanal miners would purchase mercury in Mongolia, but there always seems to be, even if it's illegal, there always seems to be a way. I know that when I spent some time in Indonesia, there was a local man whose title was the Mercury Man, and he was the man that sold the mercury. And so, it might have been illegal, but the artisanal miners knew where to buy the mercury. The other interesting fact is that as the gold price goes up, the mercury price goes up. So there's a clear understanding of the relationship between the people who are trying to buy mercury and the value of the mercury. So again, as gold prices increases, then the mercury price may increase, but the artisanal miners will still buy it. So when you look at the way that the miners use mercury, there's a couple of main types of exposure. The first one is that they treat all of the rock that they mine with mercury, because mercury attaches to the gold, and then the miners can recover the mercury with the gold, and that's shown in the picture on the left. But in that case, all of the materials that have been contacted with the mercury become contaminated with mercury. And so these might get deposited into a pond, but over a period of time, the water will transport those sediments, and it'll have a fallout zone or a large area that's contaminated, soil's contaminated with mercury. And that mercury, it gets metabolized by plant life and other organics, and then it gets into the food chain. The other main type of exposure is that the mercury that has the gold in it, that was recovered in the picture on the left, the miners then have to take this mercury and gold product, it's called an amalgam, and they burn it. And the mercury is converted into a vapor. And after you burn it, you're left with a small amount of gold left over that then you can sell to a gold shop. And so you can see the person on the right, he's got a pan over a fire. He's got the mercury amalgam in that pan, and he's sitting there with his outstretched arms, assuming that he won't get exposed. Here's another example of a person who's trying to burn the amalgam. Often this is done in the kitchen. So, families get exposed. And so the vapor that comes off that is extremely toxic. Here's another picture. The whole family is present watching, perhaps the husband, burning the amalgam, but all of those people are going to get exposed to these mercury vapors. This is a picture of my colleague, Marcelo Vega, and he has this interesting device that all you have to do is blow into it in order to measure the amount of mercury that's in your system. Basically, the mercury accumulates in your body and is expelled through your lungs. And in an area where there was artisanal gold mining in Colombia, kids were reading 500 nanograms per cubic meter in the exhaled air. If I was to breathe into that device, I might, just because I've had some dental work with mercury or some natural exposure, I might read 50 nanograms per cubic meter. And the miners, much higher, sometimes more than 2,500 nanograms per cubic meter is exhaled by the miners. So extremely high levels of mercury toxicity. So there are several symptoms associated with mercury contamination. Um, Exaggerated emotional response, so psychological problems, loss of memory, metallic taste in your mouth. It will cause a disease on the gums of around your teeth in your mouth. It cause kidney problems, muscular tremors, madness, and death. And so, there's a well-known story about Alice in Wonderland. Maybe you know it in Mongolia, maybe you don't. But the people that made the hats, like the person on the right here, he's wearing this hat. They often used mercury to help to make those hats. And those people would often have these symptoms, and they called it the Mad Hatter's disease. And that was essentially due to exposure from mercury. So in many cases, how is death caused? Well, death can be caused through the exposure to mercury, but in many cases, in different parts of the world, it simply reduces your immunity, so that if another disease is around, like tuberculosis, and you get exposed to tuberculosis, you die very quickly. So the and then in that case, the death is indicated to be tuberculosis, not recognizing how a mercury affected the immune system in order to allow you to be more vulnerable to a disease like tuberculosis. So, there's a false perception that the main mercury loss in artisanal mining is when miners burn the amalgam. The main losses occur when the whole ore is amalgamated, because now all of that soil that's been contaminated with mercury, all those sands and mined materials, they're in the environment, and they slowly release mercury. Mercury bioaccumulates. Um, and when it bioaccumulates, it gets into the food chain, and then people will eat the fish or the products. Products as simple as rice can accumulate mercury. So when I visited Indonesia, I observed artisanal mining right adjacent to rice fields, and the water from the artisanal miner was flowing right into those rice fields, and the rice was accumulating the mercury. So there has been some recommendation on improving practices to reduce exposure. Um, there's simple devices called retorts, so that when you burn the amalgam, the vapor does not escape. But it's very hard to transform the practices of artisanal miners. For them, I want to feed my family. Uh, they don't see a short-term effect of the use of mercury. However, in the long term, there is an effect. And so various technologies have been proposed to help them. Even worse, in many parts of the world, some of the artisanal miners have started to use cyanide, which leaches gold. And then they take the residue from cyanidation to leach gold, and they treat it with mercury. And or they'll do it the other way around. They'll treat the ore first with mercury to pull out as much large gold as they can, and then they will leach with cyanide. And that causes a more significant issue, because the cyanide also dissolves the mercury. And when the cyanide dissolves the mercury, it transports it into the waterways and further. So I don't think I've ever seen any examples of the use of cyanide in mercury in Mongolia, but it does happen in many parts of the world, and that's the worst type of situation that can be created. And in parts of the world, for example, there's a small town in the south of Ecuador where I visited a few times, where they have several artisanal miners or small-scale miners along a river. They first treat the ore with mercury. They then put it into a cyanide leaching process. The cyanide magically and tailings that magically disappears into the river because the miners are supposed to contain this material, but it ends up into the river. It travels down a river, and then it travels from Ecuador into Colombia, and then it travels into the ocean. And in that area, there's a large tuna fishery where the mercury accumulates in the fish. And so it causes an environmental issue for all the communities along the river, but also eventually gets into the ocean where the fish become contaminated. So some of you may know that tuna in particular are significantly contaminated. So all of the work that Marcelo has focused on and I've helped with to some extent has been really trying to change the practices of artisanal miners, to try to show them alternatives. But the artisanal miners don't necessarily trust alternatives. They trust what they know. But the alternatives that we try to recommend to them are alternatives that will actually recover more gold and should be more valuable to them. But it's not been an easy transformation. So, this is a statement from Marcelo, who's a global expert. Solutions for an artisanal miner must be transformed into a responsible miner. What kind of interventions? There needs to be training. The trainers have to be present. They have to work with the miners, participate. They have to be able to influence the miner through their personality, and they have to have patience. Because over the past 20 years that I've been involved with artisanal mining programs, I don't see that there have been really significant improvements or changes. I see that the artisanal miners, because it's a poverty-driven activity, they just follow the practices that they know. But in some areas there has been some improvements. But so it is a challenging problem to try to deal with. So that's all I wanted to say. So that's a very quick overview of artisanal mining. I hope you could follow that. I'm sure that Andre will share this presentation.
That's it. Okay.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Bernklein. So I would like to mention that today's webinar is co-organized by the GMIT and the University of British Columbia, Canada. So let's start the questions session. Do you have any questions to Professor Bernklein?
So
maybe I can ask a question. What is the state of artisanal mining in Mongolia?
Sorry?
What is the state of artisanal mining in Mongolia? Is it good
I think it will be presented in the next presentation, right?
Okay. All right.
So I have a question, Professor Bernklein, and thank you for your wonderful presentation. It's very, even it's short, it's a lot of information about the ASM and worldwide. And I would like to know those countries you mentioned, they use this gold mining, the mercury, and are they also involved in the Minamata Convention, or it's not that?
Yeah, so many of them are involved with the Minamata Convention. I can't say how many. Indonesia, for example, is participating in the Minamata Convention. So many of them are. However, despite the efforts of governments, these activities still occur underground. So while the countries may take actions, um, based on my observations over the years, I'm not convinced that's really going to change very much. So,
Okay, thank you very much. I have a question. I will read it from chat. This question was asked by Usukbaya. So how should we take care about the post-artisanal mined environment?
mhm. Okay, so Belorma actually gave a presentation on this some time ago. You know, one of the activities is just the reclamation of the land where the artisanal mining has taken place because it's unsafe to try to access those lands. There's often areas of excavation where the miners have tried to follow gold veins and they've created unsafe um, spaces that are tunnels into the underground. In terms of the mercury contamination, yeah, that's a real tough question. Um, you know, mercury doesn't disappear. You know, it persists and it eventually gets converted into a more toxic form. So there are industrial sites where there's been mercury contamination, and where there's been mercury contamination, it's been very, very expensive to try to treat those soils to remove and recover the mercury. So, you know, if I talked about the use of cyanide for gold, I'm not too worried about that. Cyanide on its own, it doesn't persist in the environment. Cyanide is carbon and nitrogen and it degrades, but mercury persists. Mercury bioaccumulates. And it is an expensive process to try to treat those areas in order to try to remove the mercury if the soils are contaminated. So there's no easy solution there.
Okay, thank you very much. Do you have any other questions to Professor Bernklein? Okay, thank you very much. So I would like to start that invite our next speakers. So I would like to invite Professor Andre Javier. Please start whenever you are ready.
I think one of my colleagues will put up the presentation, the slides.
Oh, sorry. I'll put it up.
Okay, thanks, Andy. So because this is a team project, this presentation will be presented by the team. So I'll make I'll deliver a few slides, and my colleagues will also present some on different components of the project. What I think I'd like to start just mentioning, so with Bernd's presentation, we wanted to give you a picture of how significant is artisanal mining. So 30, 40 million people involved directly, 100 to 150 million indirectly. And there are many efforts. Minamata Convention is one of them that relates to particularly artisanal gold mining. But there are many efforts, and the World Bank is play an important role in trying to understand, but also to tackle the challenges. And they have been supporting programs for many years, but under the context of COVID, they realized that there was not enough information. The mining sector, the artisanal mining sector, happens in very remote areas, and the fact that it's connected to it's a poverty-driven activity. There are many individuals that are vulnerable. So when we think about COVID and the lockdown and access to services, to health services, the bank was concerned, initially trying to understand what was happening, what was the impact. So they, through the Extractives Global Programmatic Support, they created an emergency relief response. And this was they announced, they put out a call for proposals in August last year. And in the end, they approved 22 projects, and those projects were very short. They wanted to have, 5 months project to get a temperature, to understand, take a picture of what was happening, what is happening in the context of artisanal mining and COVID. So in partnership with GMIT, UBC submitted a proposal, and we were one of the 22 projects that were selected under the first round of proposals. And our project then is looking to assessing the social and economic impacts of COVID-19 on the women artisanal miners. And we are looking at one specific ASM NGO. And in the next slide, I briefly present our team has 10 members, but there are 4 that we are leading the work. So I am the project lead. And then we have Bolorma, that she will be presenting soon as a project coordinator. We also have support from GMIT, Monksai as the project researcher, and then Professor Batsingle is an advisor together with Bern Klein and other colleagues. And also we have Angarag Alkombayer, who is a project researcher and will be presenting as well. So in the next slide, I just will gloss over some. Bern has already touched upon some of those numbers. So globally, 30 to 40 million. And then what you're gonna see, that it's very hard to find the right numbers, or somebody that tells you the right numbers, because when depending on the type of the commodity, or depending on the type of the price, so in the case of the price of the gold, you have more or less people get involved in activity. Something that is also in some places a characteristics of the sector, that they can be seasonal, meaning in some places they do agriculture, and then when the season is not good for agriculture, they do mining. So this number fluctuates. But in terms of countries, there are over 80 countries have artisanal mining. More than 30 commodities are involved or mined. And it estimates that 30% of the global ASM workforce is women. And in this graph, you can see by the shades of brown, the number of people involved in those activities. And the next slide, I cover briefly the common challenges faced by women. So as you see, we start focusing the discussion on the women, which is part of our project, to understand specifically the impact of artisanal mining, of the COVID and artisanal mining women. And some of those challenges that are listed there are not only challenges faced by women, it's a common challenge faced by the workers, by the miners, regardless gender. But in some places, depending on the culture, or depending on how the society is set up, women face more challenges. So access to finance is a common challenge. Land access, in some places, women cannot hold land titles, so it needs to depend on their male partners, which may make more challenging for them. Access to equipment and technology, the aspect or the idea of empowerment, and then in many cases, women are deprived or has limited access to education and skilled training, access to information, and then access to market and training. On again, I specifically put this slide to just to show how the numbers are it's hard to find the specific numbers. So in papers that we looked into 2004 and 2014, it talked about 100,000 miners. From the data that Bernd just presented and data that from this other paper in 2010, we talk about 61,000 miners. And present in more than 100 SUMs and in 18 IMAGs. So it's a challenge to identify who they are, how many are they, and there's a small number, as you're going to see in the next slide. There's a small number of them that are formalized. Meu amor, tô na ligação aqui agora, não posso parar, viu? Por favor. Sorry about that. So as you can see in this map, there are the level of education. They have a medium level of education. There are sorry about this interruption. So level of education is medium level. So it's a wide group. So the range, the age is from 18 years old to 70 years old. And this particularly focusing on what we call ASGM, artisanal small scale gold mining. There are 6,500 people formalized, working in 120 mine sites, and they have produced, and the Mongolian bank has bought almost 9 tons of gold. And in terms of gender participation in Mongolia, it's quite, it's a little bit higher than the average. So you see almost 6,000 male and 2,200 female. One approach that many countries use or adopt to formalize or to organize and then formalize the artisanal mining sector is through cooperatives or organizations or NGOs, and Mongolia has adopted this model. And then right now there are 87 ASM organizations in different regions, and there is one national ASM federation. And I think the next slide, I think Angarag will take over and present more specifically on our project, on the research itself, but I wanted to just give a picture of the sector and specifically looking to what we have found in the context of Mongolia. And then I'm looking forward to continue the conversation at the end with questions and answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Okay, Angra, please.
Yeah.
Start the presentation. Okay.
Yeah. So our project objective was to identify and assess the impacts of COVID-19 on women ASMR miners in Tuam Summersund. And our goal was to raise awareness and provide recommendation based on the identification and assessment of the social and economic impacts. So we partnered with Инхмүн хэргийг холбоо, Замарсунд ажиллаж байгаа төрийн бас байгууллага. So what are the research what are the research activities that we took? So we conducted an anonymous survey. 85 respondents answered to the survey, and it consisted of 31 questions. We did one-on-one interviews with 20 women ASM miners, and this allowed us to get a deeper understanding of the impacts that COVID brought on the women miners. So 12 questions were prepared, and they were conducted by Botarmach and Mutsevich. And then further on, we conducted the focus group discussions. 7 women participated in that. So I will present the survey results. So the first section of the results was the demographics that we tried to capture. So in this area, we found that majority of the minors were middle-aged women. The biggest group being 30 to 39 and 40 to 49. There was significantly decent number of women ASM minors who were over the age of 50. Many of these women had several dependents under their care. Most of these dependents were children under the age of 20 or 15, which was the biggest group. So what was their nature of work? So surprisingly, we found that a lot of these women there have been working in ASM mining for a very long time, at least more than 5 years. As you can see, 5 to 10 years, and then more than 10 years was the biggest groups. All of the women are also paid in concentrate that they eventually sell off to buyers. 95.6% of them are mining gold, and almost all of them are working without land agreement. So what were the economic impacts? So as you can see from here, ASM mining contributed to at least half, if not all of their income. And with the restrictions that COVID introduced, a lot of them found it very difficult to conduct their mining activities. And this led to a significant increase or decrease in their income. As you can see, the biggest group is, they faced a 75% or more reduction in their income. And majority, almost all of them, do not do any other economic activity. So this has impacted them greatly as they are solely relying on the income from ASM mining. So what were the social impacts? So all of this translated to an increase in domestic burden, and not just a slight increase, but a large increase in domestic burden because schools are closed, taking care of their children, not enough income. And this has increased their mental health or impacted their mental health very negatively. And this also, they reported a great increase in crime, great and slightly increased in the area. And concerningly, there was also a great, very big increase or slight increase in domestic and gender-based violence. So moving on from the effects, what are the difficulties, other difficulties that they identified? So they said that it was much more difficult in getting ASM land agreements. 81% indicated that they had greater difficulty getting access to healthcare and medicine. It was 82.6%. 87.1% indicated negative impact on their food and nutrition. And they reported greater difficulty following ASM best practices, such as wearing gloves, masks, helmets, following health and safety rules, paying for health and social insurance, using mercury-free processing, conducting rehabilitation, and working in their assigned lands. So we asked them to identify what priorities would help them to alleviate their difficulties. And I have ranked it here by their greatest priorities. So the biggest priority they identified was financial assistance. And then the second one they indicated was, sanitization and masks. 71.6 indicated food assistance, 69.5 indicated childcare or schooling, 67.7 indicated medicine, medical equipment, 66.7 indicated physical security, and 65% indicated the access to healthcare as a high priority. So I will pass it on to Bolormevich, who will talk about the interview and discussion results.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Okay, Brother Mark, please
Okay.
start whenever you are ready.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Very happy to see you all. So our interview conducted in March, and it included 20 women. And we asked, the interview consisted of 12 questions. And the main findings from the interview, we asked them what's the reasons for being involved in artisan small-scale mining. They indicated 12 people indicated there is no other job opportunity, and 4 of them indicated that citizens of Summersum actually being very discriminated, and there is no, most of the companies would not hire them. And also they indicated that no profession, and they don't have skills and profession to get to do some small businesses. And also indicated that age is a problem. If you are already more than 40 years old, there is very little chance to be employed by someone. So this is the 4 main reasons they are involved in artisan small-scale mining. We also asked them what impact and main challenges faced by the ASM during the pandemic. And all participants really responded that the COVID-19 impacted them a lot. Because of the restrictions during the pandemic, roads are closed and they cannot go outside of the town. Many women expressed them, indicated that they worked already more than 10 years and they have already very chronic diseases and surgery, and therefore they have to visit Ulaanbaatar to check for medical checkup, because in the SUMs they don't have dentists but also very specialized doctors. So because of the COVID, they really couldn't go, and access to the medical service was one of the biggest challenge. But as expressed by all the women, the fact that they cannot go to do the mining on mine sites, it's just decreased their income very sharply. And they also indicated that every 5 police posts in the small town, it's it makes it impossible to go to mine site. Recently, we also made interviews, and we find out from the interview we put what difficulties have you experienced during the pandemic, the questions. So they indicated that the children's education is a big concern. Distance learning is very difficult. Most of the families have only one laptop or one smartphone that could be used for the entire family, and therefore it's very hard for the children to use online or distance learning. And they also indicated that because of the no income, even the buying the mobile phone data, it's a big issue for them. Another reason is a health issue, as I already told, the medical service, especially for the after the surgery, if you needed some specialized medical services. But also, they also emphasize that because they don't have stable income for many years, they are not involved in the health and social insurances, and therefore it's very hard to get basic medical service without paying any payment. But most of the time they said also they just have to save some money to go to UB and get better medical service. As they staying at home and getting very little income and buying the grocery or foods from the grocery shops on loans, and adding them to the stress. So financial problem was indicated as the highest one. Gold prices, some indicated that the gold price decreased, but some said it's satisfactory. And but food and consumable products price increased, and also very difficult to pay student tuition fees. And most of them indicated that they put all their jewelry and what is good for them, high quality for them, they put on their pawn shops to get some loans. Can we go to the next one? So the other what type of assistance do you believe that local national governments should be offering to ASM communities? This was very important questions to understand them, and majority of them indicated two the assistance they really need. The first one is they really wanted to have three-party agreement. It's agreement between local artisanal small-scale mining community, government, and the mining company. They say that in the past, they had this type of agreement, and it was really good because they could go to the mine site and do the mining without having a fear being attacked by the company security guard or by the police. And or they said, we really want to have access to ASM land, which the government now provides only for those people who have connections with the local governments. And they also followed by the increased employability, support them financially, and also food bank support is very important assistance to them. Okay, so we can go further. So we also asked them, what are the key issues that need to be addressed around the artisanal small-scale mining communities? So it's come out that the first one is the biggest issue is artisanal small-scale mining land permission. Excuse me, are you okay? Do you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah,
I can
yeah.
hear you.
Sorry. They also indicated there's really very no support from local and national governments, no understanding from them to provide the land for them. That was a very high issue. But also they indicated that police violence, like very harsh treatment for them. They confiscate their equipment, they put penalties, and even they confiscate their cars. And also they emphasize that discrimination, it was like they used a lot of this word of citizen of Samarsum is very high. It's never been before like that. And some kind of, I feel like in the between communities and the Samarsum citizens, it's like a very big black wall. And access to medical services and even the supplies, like medicines and social and health insurance, they're another big issue they wanted to address. And they were also concerned about their children. Some of the children becoming like teenagers and more. They see the children have no interest in, no motivation, like they can't see any future perspectives. And also they indicate, even though there are not like many companies, like about 40, 50, there is no like infrastructure, there is no paved roads. So it's so much dust, pollution, and land degradation everywhere. And also they say that some environmental companies, instead of doing land rehabilitation, they also engage actually in mining. Can you go next one? So the focus group discussion, we involved about 7 women, and the objective of this focus group discussion was really to identify potential solutions to the problems and difficulties actually they indicated in the survey and interviews. And also we want to find out what the role that different stakeholders can have to implement those solutions in order to help the artisanal small-scale mining communities. The potential solution they identified by the women artisanal miners, they said this tripartite agreement, like local government, mining company, and ASM NGO is the best. It worked well and it can be very sustainable. They see that some companies are willing to do it, and they really want that the local government should facilitate this negotiation. They also were keen to conduct environmental rehabilitation of mining land because they see there is so much land degradation. So they've been very keen to do this environmental rehabilitation. And also they want that ASEM land agreement, you know, and according to ASEM regulation in Mongolia, there is a local government can make a land agreement with them only on the special land. Yeah. So they want really this land agreement can be done only with the resident of Samarsum. But they also identified that the challenges to implement these free solutions. One is the local government is not very supportive. They also feel that if you are from the different parties, they are not support. So it's very affecting their life. They also indicated that companies do not have any corporate social responsibility strategy to work with the local communities and the government. They also will, we also ask them what are the threats they feel related to the COVID. They identified that restrictions like mobility restriction is the very hard one because it's makes impossible for them to go to the mine site, but also the police, they have to pay penalties if they get caught, and confiscation of their equipment, tools, and even cars. Yeah. Threats not relevant to the COVID. They say that artisans, miners do not have this access to land, either no permission or no contract has been used, has been signed with them, and security of mining companies also confiscate their belongings, and violence and threats from police and security guard. It's very scaring, and also they feel like very stressful, and it also risk to their lives. Also, the artisanal small-scale mining women miners see the role of ASEM NGO as the main force to make this tripartite agreement. And by this, also they see to have the stable income and be secure. All right, thank you for listening, and feel free to ask any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Andre Angrak and Badamaj. Okay, I would like to open the question session. Do you have any questions regarding this?
I have a question.
Sure. Okay.
First one is the data collection, and how was the age range of the participants, and how did you minimize the bias of ages on the survey results? And second one is the challenges of the ASM miners, and if they are assigned to specific land, and are the miners willing to pay some kind of taxes or royalties to the local government? What do you think?
Okay. Angrak, first question.
Yeah, so I brought it back to the slide that was showing the age. So they're mostly middle-aged women. We distributed the survey through an anonymous link, so we do not know who they are, but we had a local contact that helped in distributing the survey and answering the survey questions, because a lot of the ASM miners there, they had difficulty using accessing the survey, so we had to use a local contact to gather and distribute.
If I may add, so this particular NGO, they have 100, I believe 127 members, and around 80 or 85 are women. So for the number of responses that we received is above the average of distributing surveys. And we are not necessarily looking for a specific population. We wanted to distribute and get as many responses as we could.
Okay, thank you. Second question, about the mic, please.
Okay, the second question was about the land, access to land. Yeah. So according to the ASM regulation in Mongolia, they have 3 possibilities to access to land. So one is it's called abandoned sites of the previously mined land. Yeah. So there is in Mongolia historically there were some mine and then they abandoned the site. So it's abandoned sites can be used for ASM activities. This is one as possibility. The second one, the local government discuss within the local Sun citizens representative Huraj, identify land with some occurrences of the gold, for example, yeah? And then need to request to the Mineral Resources Authority of Mongolia, asking about this land permission, asking about this land if it's not under the strategic deposit, yeah? Or whether this land is not under the somebody's license. If the MRAM says that this land is not under any, the mining license, they can use it for, it's called for special purpose. And then the citizens representative Hural can make agreement, like local government can make agreement with the local communities to work on this land. The third option is to cooperate with the company, mining company, local government, and the ASM communities to make this tripartite agreement. Many artisanal miners prefer this tripartite agreement because they believe that this licensed land have deposits. Yeah, so usually they can work in the areas where big mines like is not will not do mine because it's economically not feasible. So this part worked well in the past. The third question was related to the taxes. Usually, according to this regulation, there is no taxes. However, they must be organized into partnerships. They have to pay all the health and social insurances. And in many cases, I know I worked with some communities there in the past, like years ago. They've been paying a lot of donations to the local government, and also they've been organizing English language Olympics, and they provided the money funds for it, or sport competition, or the Sumnadam. They always contributed this way to the local government. There is no official tax paying for that, for the ASM land use.
Thank you very much, Angrap and Madamaj. Do you have any other questions?
Excuse me, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, please.
Okay. Good morning, and thank you for your presentation. I have 2 questions. The first one is regarding in the participant survey. I wanted to ask if we could know whether the female participants were involved in a partnership organization that has influenced their income to be more than the individual independent miner females. Was it an factor that was considered or not? And the second question would be, as in the solutions, there was no mention in equal gender reach, and could you please explain why the equal participation encouragement wasn't mentioned or wasn't seen as sufficient as an answer to leverage participation of women in mining? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So, Andre, Professor. Sorry, you are muted.
Could you please repeat the question? So I was
Okay.
taking notes, but I'm not sure if I got to everything.
Okay. My first question was if the financial burdens, it was about the participants' description. So I wanted to ask if the survey participants were either fully involved in the partnership of an organization, or were they mostly independent miners. I just thought it might had influenced their income. So I just want to know about it.
I guess.
So
Oh, sorry.
I will start and then you please complement. So all of them are members of this specific NGO. So they are in this way involved in the partnership. And that particular NGO, as I said, has both male and female. What makes in this NGO, I think, unique is the largest membership is formed by women. So when we wanted, and then when we wanted to present a project to the World Bank to understand the impact of COVID on women, that seemed to us the appropriate NGO because of the large number of members being female. So I think part of the answer to your questions, all of them are members. We didn't separate or to look into whether male, what is the income by gender. So we looked into how the income of the miners was affected. And this was what Andy showed before. Andy, do you want to complement?
Yeah, so we approached, or I approached the survey design as an understanding the income of the miners as the entire household. So one women miner in the household, how many dependents do they have? So when you saw the survey result, when they mentioned maybe it's 50% income to their entire household, that it can also mean the husband is earning the rest of the income. So the survey was the first one to be implemented. So we started the survey to gain a general understanding of what might be going on, what's the effects. To get a more deeper understanding, we started the interviews and the focus discussion groups. So when you look at the timeline of the activities, we started the survey first, gained some rudimentary basic or insight into what is happening, and then conducted the interviews in the focus groups. And there was some information that I did not include in the slides, and one of them was that none of the miners, not none, but over 90% of the miners have gotten no financial assistance. So I guess that kind of answers your question of whether they got supplemented income or they got money from elsewhere. They answered no.
Yeah, most of them during the interview they said that because of they cannot do artisanal small scale mining, the only income it's now child money. Yeah, that's the only kind of assistance which they start receiving from summer last year, I think. It's the child money. Yeah.
And then I think I'd like to make a general comment that it might be also playing a role in the Mongolian context. And this is happening, for instance, with the Minamata Convention, right? So the Minamata, the countries make a commitment saying we're going to ban mercury, and then they have a certain number of years to adjust and to respond. So the first thing that they do with the Minamata, in response to the Minamata Convention or to compliance with the Minamata Convention, is to make what they call a national action plan. They do an assessment of how much mercury is in the country, where the mercury is coming from. And then in countries where they have artisanal mining, they identify, they estimate how much mercury is being used, and they have a plan to phase out the use of mercury. And then this is happening in Honduras, for instance. After they did the assessment, after they mapped out where the sources and the uses of mercury are, they established a number of years to stop using mercury. From that point on, this will become illegal. So formalizing artisanal mining is very difficult. There are some progresses are being made, but there are more miners coming. So there's always a challenge. So what happens when the government decides to enforce a law is that those that are compliant are on the side of the law. But for whatever reason, those that are not being able to comply, they become illegal and under the effect or the punishment of the law. So this goes with the Mercury Convention of the Minamata Convention. This goes with when the government decides to formalize artisanal mining and create a set of rules, and then you have a certain number of time or years to comply. And after that, everybody's that is not on the law, on the side of the law, is illegal. So in the end, something that is positive in a way, because you encourage formalization, the side effect of formalization without the necessary support to transition into formalization is pushing a number of people to the illegality. So, and then you start treating those people as criminals. And then if you look at if you talk to them, as Bern said, and we know that this is a poverty-driven activity. They are there not because they have no option. So the problem is much more complex than having a legislation that says you need to have a piece of paper to be formal, because keeping formal and formalized is not easy. So it invites to a very much profound discussion. And then what we are seeing in the context of Mongolia recently is as a result of our study, they don't have access to land. The permits are not being issued. So once Mongolia has a success path into formalization with those 87 organizations being formalized being created. But if you have no official land to do your work, you will do in land that are not proper for it. And then where is what is the safe, well, not the safest, but what is the place with more likelihood to find gold? The mine sites of the larger companies. So, and then you start creating another problem that you are now trespassing the property of a private organization that has a formal license. And then this becomes a cycle. And then we start seeing the miners again, as in Brazil, they see as the garimpeiros, or in Mongolia, you saw as ninja miners, and you start pushing those human beings into poverty, push those human beings into illegality. So it's much more profound than say you are legal or illegal. And I hope we want to bring this to your attention so you see how complex the picture is.
Okay, thank you, Professor Andre. Do you have any other questions?
And I just to add that Mongolian ASM regulation also obliges rehabilitation of the ASM land, and those who actually been formalized, like about 6,000 miners, they make contract with the local government on this small land, and then every year they do their rehabilitation and submit it to the local government. And actually the SUM inspector, environmental inspector, governor, and other authority, they actually taking it over, like, signing it. And some of the good practices was like every Tuesday, like one day of the week, they actually doing not mining but rehab. Yeah, it's in order to, they're putting their labor, instead of having rehabilitation, but every day they do rehabilitation or of this land. The rehabilitation methodology actually was developed, and it's very economically feasible, and also taught them how to do it, which is also ecologically viable. But the main idea was that of this methodology, they how to make safe this environment, the physical safe of the land. So most of the mine, they know where is the tunnels, and how deep they are. So in that case, what they should do is reprofile the land, so in order to be more safe. So by letting them knowing how to do it, it was actually very useful, and then also they become more responsible. And every year they do the environmental rehabilitation, they will be rewarded by that, making a contract for the next year again on the other land.
Okay, thank you very much. So, any other questions? Okay. Okay, thank you very much for the speakers for today's webinar. So now I would like to invite Rector Batzingo for the closing remark.
Okay. Thank you, Muksaya. I very much appreciate the wonderful presentations of the presenter, Professor Bernd Klein. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and experience in artisanal mining, small-scale mining, and also the UBC colleagues, the research team presenting the research project result of the impact of the COVID-19 to ASM mining. So as we all know, the ASM mining is a part of the Mongolian mining. And since 1990, as I read also the statistics in informal ASM has been started, and it called also commonly referred to the ninja, and become only alternative income of those people. And there was unemployment opportunity in the rural area for the herders who had lost their livelihood. And officially, statistics says there are 38,000 ASM miners, but unofficially this number increases up to 100,000. And of those miners, 1/3 are women and 2/3 are men, and 400,000 people are dependent indirectly this activity. So therefore, ASM still plays an important role in Mongolia, in miners and society. And I think this research project funded by the World Bank will provide a very beneficial results, and which can impact on the governmental policy and community development. And so that I really thank you, UBC colleagues, Bernd, Andre, and Bolorma, Angrak, Ali, and GMIT colleague, Muksaya, for your amazing work, which contributes a lot to people, community, government on policy of the ASM small-scale mining. And GMIT and UBC has a partnership collaboration, special official MOU, and this webinar is also in frame of our collaboration. And so that I wish to GMIT and UBC collaboration for further successful cooperation, and wish you all for big success. Very important as good health during this difficult pandemic time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Rector Batzingo. Okay, I would like to close today's webinar. Thank you very much for your kind attendance.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thanks.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Have a nice day. Be safe. Stay home.
Thank you.
Be safe, stay.
Be safe.
Thank you.
Have a nice weekend.